Good morning, everyone. I am Norma Serrasogas, and I am an environmental analyst with Transport Canada. I will be chairing today's session, and Megan Matheson from ClearSeas will assist me providing technical support. Please note that this session will be recorded and posted on the ClearSeas website along with the presentation slides after the meeting. All registrants will be notified when the recording is available. Before we get started, I would like to take a moment and acknowledge that I'm joining today from the traditional unceded territory of the Hltaanuwaay people. I live in Victoria, but I'm actually in Ottawa for work. So now we'll have a brief introductions. This event is organized as part of the Canadian Marine Shipping Risk Forum, which is a community of practice hosted by MEOPAR, the Marine Environmental Observation, Prediction and Response Network, and ClearSeas. The community of practice is open to all who are interested in the work of understanding and mitigating shipping risk. So thank you for joining the third session in our 2023 webinar series, focused on technology and its role in mitigating shipping risks. If you missed the first session on satellite technology or the second one on aerial technology, you can find the recordings on the ClearSeas website, and hopefully Megan will help me at including the link so you can go and watch past sessions. So about this time series, the webinar series will investigate different ways technology is being applied to understand the marine environment, with a particular focus on the activities and impacts of vessels that are not using automatic identification system or AIS transponders. As a result of this knowledge sharing, community of practice members can apply this range of technologies in new ways to address information needs for a safer marine environment. Following this webinar series, the Canadian Marine Shipping Risk Forum will provide a compilation of technologies and the applications shared in this series as a reference document for community of practice members. Participants, please remain muted during the presentations. You're encouraged to raise your hand and unmute to ask questions after the presentation. If you prefer, you can type your questions into the Q&A function, and either me or Megan, we can read them out loud. So today we have actually two speakers. We had a third speaker, Rianna Burnham from Fisheries and Oceans Canada, but she's not able to present today because she's away in the field. So we'll try to reschedule her talk at another time. So the first presenters are Tayler, Yuri, and Kelly, and I'm just gonna give them read their short bio, and then we can get started. So Tayler Brown, and I'm gonna let you give your full name, in your native language. I don't think I can make it justice. It's of Haida, Mexican and Scottish and English ancestry, and it's part of the Hltaanuwaay. Oh my goodness, that's really bad. I should have practiced that, so my apologies. Eagle clan of the Haida Nation. Tayler lives in on Hltaanuwaay and works as a marine spatial planner for the Council of Haida Nation. As part of Haida Nation's marine planning efforts, Tayler has focused on supporting a variety of projects, including the monitoring of large and small vessels within the Haida Territories as part of various marine plans, including the Skanking of Boise Marine Protected Area Management Plan. Recently, she has supported the development of the Northern Shelf Bioregion MPA Network Action Plan, and the current site assessment processes for multiple planned marine protected areas within Haida-Waay's subregion. In community, Tayler currently sits on the Sandlingland 9 Haida-Waay Museum Board and Haida Repatriation Committee. Sorry if I'm butchering all those term, so sorry about that. Yuri Bykov is a software developer and computational bioanalyst with LGL Ltd. He joined LGL in 2005 as a software developer. He brings with him a combination of software and data engineering skills, as well as expertise in data science. During his work at LGL, Yuri has provided analytical and statistical support for multiple LGL projects. His notable software development projects include a multi-platform mobile data collection framework with cloud-based storage backend, Android-based catch monitoring software, web-accessible tools for the analysis of multi-year total gas pressure monitoring data, and assessing risk of offshore oil and gas activity sound exposure to marine mammals, and a web application that LGL uses internally to manage project and safety data. Yuri has also designed and implemented a number of database systems on a variety of platforms, including a large-scale data repository for the Western North Pacific, Korean Great Whale project data, a hybrid photo data database for the photo identification data, and a database system for storage and analysis of the multi-year oil sands data. And finally, we have Kelly Larkin with the Enhanced Maritime Situational Awareness, or EMSA program. His program manager at Transport Canada. Kelly's career of senior leadership appointments includes public and private sectors, and responsibility for complex and geographical dispersed operations in the RCN, federally and provincial governments, and BC marine industry. As a former captain in 3 of Her Majesty's Canadian ships of the Royal Canadian Navy, an executive officer in 3 RCN submarines, Kelly has expertise in a wide range of national and international marine security operations, including piracy suppression in the Arabian Sea. Community roles include serving as a member of the board of directors for the Royal Canadian Sea Cadet Education Fund. Now with Transport Canada, he works in partnership with Indigenous nations across Canada's 3 coasts in advancing the Enhanced Maritime Situational Awareness Initiative as part of the Oceans Protection Plan. Kelly has an MBA from Royal Roads and a Master's of Defense Studies from the Royal Military College of Canada. All right. And with that, I think I can just pass it on to Tayler to start with her presentation.
All right, good morning, everyone. I'm just going to get this set up. Oops. Perfect.
Yeah, you're looking good. You can see the slides.
Awesome. Okay, so Singat la Hltaanuwaay Hltaanuwaay gaga wagan Tayler Hltaanuwaay gaga yats Haida Kiski. My name is Hltaanuwaay, my English name is Tayler, and as Norma introduced, I'm a marine spatial planner working with the Council of the Haida Nation, and today I'm presenting to you all from the traditional and unceded territories of many Coast Salish nations, including the Kwantlen, Samiamu, and Stolo nations. Today, the work that we're presenting is based in the traditional territories of the Haida Nation. The well-being of the oceans is integral to the well-being of our communities and our way of life. Laguga Conslans, or responsibility, is passed on by our ancestors to care for the land and sea and to ensure that we can pass it on to future generations. And today, we aim to run through our project, the background behind the project, including some previous and ongoing work being undertaken by the Council of the Haida Nation as well. And then we'll dive into the study and some of our lessons learned. And just to share what's being shown on the map on the slide is an overview of Haida Territories extending into the abyssal depths of the Pacific, just to give some context of where we're focusing. So What is shown here is an overview of vessel traffic around Haida Gwaii and showing where some of the major ports are on the coast of British Columbia. The Council of the Haida Nation has a long history of monitoring vessel traffic and other related activities, including but not limited to responding to marine shipping incidents and monitoring and managing recreational fishing activities. This all started in 1990 with the Haida Gwaii Watchman Program, which began in Chiix and Hltaanuwaay, or Langara Island and Naden Harbor. This program later grew in scope to include daily boat counts, and the Creel Survey Program officially started in 1996, which continues today and continues to operate this work. From this, we have a fairly robust data set that extends for the entire north coast of Haida Gwaii and down through the west coast of Haida Gwaii in through Skidegate Narrows. So in 2018, other monitoring work that's happening is under the Reconciliation Framework Agreement. In 2018, the Council of the Haida Nation and 13 other nations within the Northern Shelf Bioregion signed the RFA for Oceans Protection and Management. This established a trilateral group that works to coordinate marine activities in the environment within the Northern Shelf Bioregion. And some of the projects that are focused on are establishing a safe distance offshore, or the voluntary protection zone for the west coast of Haida Gwaii, and then our Haida Gwaii Marine Awareness Project. Where that facilitates our work for the Enhanced Maritime More 2.
Right. Thanks very much, Taylor. Well, good morning, everyone. As previously introduced, I'm Kelly Larkin with Transport Canada, the Pacific Region Program Manager, and I'm speaking to you from the traditional unceded territories of the Esquimalt and Songhees First Nations and the Lekwungen speaking peoples. In order to provide you with some context for Transport Canada's part in all this, I'd like to take a moment to give you some of the background to the EMSA project and how we began working with the Council of the Haida Nation as partners in developing EMSA, Enhanced Maritime Situational Awareness. Next slide, please. So the story of EMSA goes back to late 2014, even before the Oceans Protection Plan began. Transport Canada and other federal partners had begun a series of workshops along the West Coast to explain how the marine safety system works and to get feedback from Indigenous and other coastal communities on how we could do things better and more collaboratively. There were two main concerns expressed. First, that communities lacked maritime situational awareness of vessel traffic in their own territories. And secondly, that there needed to be a common operating picture available for Indigenous governments to work alongside Transport Canada, the Canadian Coast Guard, and the Canadian Coast Guard during emergencies to make possible collaborative planning and decision-making. Now, when you look at these three pictures, these are all from about that time frame. The Simashir in the upper right-hand corner, Leviathan 2 in the upper left-hand corner, which occurred off Tofino, and the Nathan E. Stewart in the lower left-hand corner. And each one of these had a significant presence of Indigenous peoples, the Council of the Haida Nation, the Hausut First Nation, and the Celtic First Nation regarding the Nathan E. Stewart. And not only did they save lives, but they are the people whose livelihood is most directly impacted when marine incidents occur, and sometimes for years afterwards. So the requirement was then funded under the Oceans Protection Plan, the original OPP, to undertake a pilot project in partnership with Indigenous communities from across Canada's three coasts. Supported by our contractor, we launched the initial version of EMSA in May of 2019 and now have about 900 users of the system from Indigenous and coastal communities, federal and provincial governments, marine safety authorities, port authorities, academia, and the marine industry. So a really wide, diverse range of participants in the project. And EMSA is now employed by roughly half of Canada's 185 Indigenous communities across all three of Canada's coasts. Next slide, please. The Council of the Haida Nation is one of our 13 pilot host partners in the EMSA project who share in the governance of EMSA. The system's use, including various supported projects, are all implemented, in this case with CHN, under the Reconciliation Framework Agreement that Tayler spoke about earlier. At present, EMSA provides near real-time vessel traffic information derived from a fused feed of automatic identification system data, AIS, which includes terrestrial and satellite AIS data providers, as well as weather, sea state, and extensive marine environmental science database to provide a comprehensive picture of current activities in both the nearshore and offshore environments. Next slide. So the image here in the lower left-hand corner of the slide shows the tracking of specific vessels to and from their destinations in Haida Gwaii. EMSA has the capabilities to allow a user to go back in time to review the movements of specific vessels or specific types of vessels for a specific period of time. This data can also contribute to heat maps, giving indication of areas that have higher volumes of vessel traffic. The image in the top right corner shows the Voluntary Protection Zone, which is that project co-led by the Council of the Haida Nation and Transport Canada, which involves significant collaboration between CHN, the Government of Canada, and the marine shipping industry. The aim of this initiative is to reduce the risk of drift groundings by having marine shipping transit further offshore. If you recall that previous picture of the Simishir in the upper right-hand corner of an earlier slide, that vessel had lost power and and drifted to within 5 nautical miles of grounding on the west coast of Haida Gwaii in late October 2014. The words of Peter Lanton, who was then the president of the Council of the Haida Nation, it was a brutal awakening. So now, due to the high participation rates of marine shipping in this project, the risk of drift grounding has been greatly reduced. The Council of the Haida Nation and Transport Canada analysts employ EMSA to monitor participation rates within the voluntary protection zone to support public communications and collaborative co-governance, planning, and decision-making in the project. Next slide. So while AIS, Automatic Identification System data, allows tracking of larger marine traffic and fishing vessels, there still needs to be coverage associated with smaller traffic that isn't required to carry AIS. And this presents a challenge to find innovative ways of filling that data gap for monitoring smaller vessels that do add a degree of risk to ocean health. This may include smaller fishing vessels, sailing vessels, and other small pleasure craft or tugboats. The presence of these vessels may also generate acoustic noise in the water, which impacts marine mammals and their ability to forage or navigate. It can also elevate risk of whale strikes and potentially contribute to the transmission of aquatic invasive species from other parts of the coast. So in response to this concern, the EMSA project has begun exploring non-AIS vessel data sources, such as raw radar feed or RadarSat, it was discussed earlier, or other innovative technologies which are being discussed in this workshop. We've already proven EMSA's ability to ingest radar data in a project with the Windsor Port Authority. We imported their radar picture in real time into EMSA and superimposed it on other data sources to achieve a degree of correlation of the overall picture. And so it's just a question of time before other non-AIS sources are also available. I'm happy to discuss this further during our Q&A session. But for now, I'm going to hand it back to Tayler, and she'll discuss the approach taken by the Council of the Haida Nation.
Thanks, Kelly. So understanding the impacts of vessel traffic, both large and small, is embedded in our marine plans, such as the Skonkinthasbowie Seamount Management Plan and the Gwaii Hltaanuwaay Management Plan. Both of these provide management direction to monitor and work towards prevention measures for large vessels in the offshore, as well as monitoring vessels in the nearshore under the Haida Marine Plan. And this is the Haida Marine Plan focuses more on monitoring and managing invasive species and recreational fishing. It's from management plans and work such as this that we've developed our research objectives from to answer some of the questions. And from these management plans, we also, and previous work, we've identified multiple criteria to select the sites that were designated for the work, identified for the work. This is based off of ongoing and previous work, such as work that we've done with EMSA Technologies to identify areas of high risk of invasive species invasion or spread, or work that we've done with Oceans Network Canada to identify areas of high densities of small vessel traffic and a small vessel traffic that's equipped with AIS devices. These criteria were themed based off of ongoing work, such as under a recreational fishing or Haida Marine Awareness project, just to make it clear to understand which research question they would be answering. And through these criteria, we identified 18 locations to be piloted for this project, as shown on this map, and deployed about 26 cameras to work to see if this is a feasible technology. And now I will pass to Yuri to talk more about the data collection methods and processing.
Hello, everyone. So yeah, LGL has sort of long used the automatic deployed cameras to capture and identify the wildlife, like that nice bear on the right side photo there. Specifically, the camera that we're using, a Reconyx HP2X. And you can see there sort of a self-contained box with batteries and occasionally solar panels that just gets deployed somewhere and sits there taking pictures. So we wanted to test if those cameras will be good enough for the nearshore vessel data collection. We did some pilot tests, and turns out that they were fine. So next, please. And they were able to photograph the boats. So once we knew that that will work, those cameras were deployed at the 26 cameras were deployed at those 18 sites that Tayler has mentioned earlier. And they were set to take a burst of 3 photos every minute. And since the cameras were there for, like, individual cameras stayed there from 17 to 139 nights, depending on if it had some technical issues or not quite correct locations. As you can imagine, taking 3 photos every minute for 26 cameras, 24 hours a day in, on average, probably around 100 nights, resulted in quite a lot of photos. Next, please. And specifically, it resulted in us taking 5.5 million photos. So that was quite infeasible to process manually. So we decided to employ the machine learning approach and develop the automated processing method for it. Next. Next. And specifically, after considering various approaches and network topologies, we settled down on the YOLO V5, or YOLO stands for You Only Look Once. This is the object detection framework, which has high accuracy and speed. This network was pre-trained on the COCO, or Common Object in Context dataset, which comprises of about 1.5 million photos of 80 different classes of objects. Next. After this, we further enhanced the training of this network by manually processing about 300,000 photos, or 5% approximately of our data set, manually classifying them and using the results we obtained to enhance the training using the transfer learning approach. And next. The resulting model was tested on the validation data set to make sure what the detection rates are. And the detection threshold was adjusted downwards to avoid false negatives at the cost of some false positives that we could filter out later in the post-processing step. The The network was deployed on the Google Colab Plus cloud infrastructure, and multiple instances of it were run simultaneously to process our 5.5 million photos at the rate of about photo every 0.1 second. Still, it took about 6 days to process everything, but yeah, that's just automatically, it just sits there, churns through stuff. After we got the result, we did some post-processing, removing the false positives based on the implausible location or size of identified object, and then conducted a manual review to make sure that our detection is accurate. Next, please. And we were quite pleasantly surprised as how the network performed. Originally, we were quite sure that we'd be able to detect sort of the good size vessel photos in good lighting conditions, such as the middle top image. But as it turned out, it also performed quite well, unexpectedly well, on the photos of the vessels at night, such as the top left and the middle right image, or the photos of boats that were quite far away and just really comprised of a few pixels on the photo, such as the bottom left one or the top right, or in fact, sort of the worst of both worlds, the middle right one there, where we have just a tiny boat at night, but seems to have detected them quite well. So next, please. So in generally, after processing the 5.5 million photos, we got 34,624 detections, which were quite unexpectedly so, quite unevenly distributed in time and space. So space-wise, the two top by far the busiest locations were the Parry Passage, where we had 12,700 detections, and the Nadine Harbor, where we had about 9,500 detections. And time-wise, the busiest months turned out to be July with more than 20,000 detections, followed by August with about 10,000. And now I pass it back to Tayler.
Thanks, Yuri. So the vessel photo detections with the wildlife cameras were also integrated with using EMSA to capture AIS data in the same areas to understand the proportion of vessels that have AIS that might have been captured with the photos. The monthly ratios from camera-based to AIS varied greatly from 4 detections in Naden to over 1,000 in Port Louis. And so understanding that the AIS detections are biased towards vessels that are large enough that are required to carry the AIS devices, and the camera detections would be more biased to vessels that are spending more time in these areas. We can't say that they're completely correlated, but we can see that there is a similar pattern in terms of when there's more vessels in the area, which, as was seen in the previous slide, July and August had the highest numbers for camera detections, and July and August also have the highest numbers for our geofence events that were employed on EMSA. From the study, we have 3 key recommendations moving forward to enhance this work. Currently, we're working with LGL to refine the machine learning process to identify unique vessels to better understand traffic patterns and connectivity between sites. Additionally, as Kelly had talked about with EMSA, learning about and utilizing new technologies such as radar sat on EMSA to monitor and identify vessels not equipped with AIS devices to create a more clear picture. Additionally, we were provided recommendations for improving camera placements in future iterations of the study. As Yuri had mentioned, there were some difficulties with some of the camera placements. For example, with removing one of the cameras, there was a spider's nest that went right over the lens, and so that removed camera days. Another example is setting a camera up where float planes landed, so there was false detections in that area quite a bit. And then finally, sharing lessons learned from this study and supporting other monitoring work that's happening within Haida Gwaii. So one of the actions that we're hoping to take from this study is to supplement the existing creel survey work to support just creating a higher resolution of information for Haida Gwaii and the recreational fishing traffic that's happening to support other work that the nation's doing. Thank you all for taking the time to listen about our project. There are many people who have contributed to this work over the years since 2021. And this includes Norma Sarah herself, who met with Olivia, and Olivia Choi, our Marine Shipping and Safety Project Manager, at the beginning of this work, as a lot of this was based off of previous work that she's completed, as well as Virgil Hawks from LGL, who has supported the development of this project. Keegan Myers, who supported the field aspect of this work, training CHN staff to do the field work as the study was conducted during the height of the COVID pandemic. And so it was CHN staff out deploying the cameras where LGL might have been more involved in that portion of the work. And then finally, Mike Sylvester from Transport Canada, who has played a great role in sharing this information with us as well.
I'm looking for the mute. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Tayler, Yuri, and Kelly for your presentation. Okay, so I'm gonna open the floor for questions. So just a reminder, you can raise your hand. I don't know, Megan, I guess people can unmute their microphones themselves, right? We don't have to do that for them.
If they can't, I'll be able to unmute them if they raise their hand.
Oh, they just need to raise their hand if they want to ask a question. So we can do that. Maybe we have, Megan is so much better at this than I am, so I'm gonna try my best. So we have the Q&A chat, and if you feel free, any of the speakers, to address questions that as they come in. People can look at the chat as well and see what questions are being answered. Also, I can start with a couple of questions just to get things going. And I'm just, say I was wanted to set a project like this, you mentioned, camera placement is quite important. Could you, any of you, provide like a kind of a basic recipe, like take this into consideration when you at the minimum when you're thinking about placing your cameras?
When we were out in the field, some of the considerations that we were taking into it was having a wide enough field of view so that it wasn't obstructed, so that we'd have as far distance of water to capture. So it was more opportunity to capture a boat as it was passing by. Some of the areas boats would be moving fairly quickly. That was also another reason why we did the 3 photos per minute. It's just higher opportunity to capture a boat. And an example would be in Skidegate Narrows. It's a very narrow channel, and boats can move there through fairly high speeds when the tide is high. So one of the pieces that we struggled with there is being able to orientate the camera to go down the narrows instead of just looking at it perpendicularly. Perpendicular, you have less opportunity to capture the boat, and so you might capture after effects like wake, but miss the boat itself entirely. So that was one thing that we wanted to change. Other pieces would be branches moving in the way, making sure we didn't want to remove branches too much from live trees, but where it was able to and it wasn't taking too much off, we would remove branches or find good stumps to install the cameras on that were out off the tree line. We also contracted some people to help build stands that we could install in the nearshore, just so that we weren't drilling into trees or having to, if we needed to find some other solution to make that area feasible, if it was a priority. And I think we only utilized that maybe once, but it was just ways that we were trying to be prepared. The coast of Haida, where we deployed the sites, is very, it varies quite greatly in terms of how much access you might be able to have for where the cameras could go. So just trying to be as prepared as possible.
So was that a condition as well, like accessibility, or you had the capacity, like, no, we have vessels, we can go around and access remote sites that are not accessible from land, or no, you had to be able
we had to use boats to access all of the sites. So weather was definitely a challenge where we weren't able to retrieve cameras and change out batteries or memory cards as frequently as we would have liked to. Getting to Port Louis, for example, is quite a couple hours boat ride up the coast. And if sea conditions aren't great, it's not safe to be going there and back in a day, and trying to avoid overnight trips as much as possible. Facing with weather limitations, that was also a consideration for why we had such a varied number of camera days, in terms of it varying from 17 days to 139. The camera, sometimes the batteries died or the memory card corrupted and wasn't able to take photos during a certain period of time. So just working through those. It was for a pilot project, it gave us quite a few opportunities to see what could go wrong, and really pick where we wanted to have cameras in the future.
So actually, on those lessons learned, like, will you be compiling, or because I can see this being very helpful to other nations that are looking at maybe doing a similar either pilot or implementing or using cameras to monitor vessel traffic. But I think it will be great to have that information as to, like, okay, this is what worked for us, what didn't work. Is there a document of this kind, or are you guys thinking about putting together something like that, or they should just reach out to you, Tayler, if they want to learn more specifics?
Yeah, LGL's put together a report for us from the study. We have a final draft of it currently, but we're still working on refining the process in terms of being able to identify unique vessels so that we can ensure that we're not counting the same boat twice on a pass through. So as this process is being refined, we'll do more work to communicate this work out more fully. So currently contacting our project team would be the best way to learn more about the work. And
okay, great. Kelly,
Yeah, there's actually a question in the Q&A chat room from Gurpreet Singh. I'm just curious to know if there's any scope where or when the camera detects any accidents. Does it raise an alarm in real time, or cameras are used for specifically collecting a database?
Yeah, no, there is definitely no real-time feedback with this project. First of all, because we don't really have access to the photos in any real time. Technically, it's a bit of catch-22. Technically, you can actually get the Reconyx camera, which will upload the photos through the satellite network immediately. But because we are talking about remote areas, I mean, there's not necessarily a satellite coverage or good coverage where the camera is. So, and in this case, it's kind of even it's well, not enhanced. It's the other compounding issue there is, of course, all the machine learning method is batch processing the stuff after it's collected, and as I said, it takes quite a while. I mean, if you had a small data set, it can be processed quickly, but for our complete data set, it took 6 days of quite a fast compute time to do that. So no, there is definitely no real time anything with it.
Okay, so hopefully that answered your question. There is, so just to clarify, and I guess this question was for you, Yuri, the number of identified targets on the images, those could be actually the same vessel going back and forth, right? So
yes,
you're
and
working at uniquely identifying vessels now.
Yeah, and in some cases it is. So the number that I quoted, 34,624, that's actually 34,624 photos which had some sort of vessel detection. And you've seen there was one of the examples there in where I had the 9 photos in the slide, where sometimes there are multiple vessels in one slide, sometimes there's just one. It could be the same. So there were definitely cases where, when I kind of manually was looking through the photos, where the camera would be looking at some area and you'd have the vessel kind of going about in loops fishing. In other cases, you have, as Tayler has mentioned, you'd have like a fast boat just going through the frame, and you don't even have all of it. You have a wake, you have and actually the wakes are the ones that are not necessarily going to be detected because they're not boat shaped. But if it catches like a part of the motor, for example, or just the part of the front of the boat, it still quite often detects that it's a boat, because man-made structures are different than what you have in nature. So yeah, no, this is just purely the number of occurrences of what was detected. It could be the same boat, it could be not the same boat, but detecting the individual boats, sort of, it's an interesting problem. It's not going to be completely possible, because in many cases you only have like a little blip of a few pixels going. If it's a vessel that's a small one at the far end of the view. So in some cases you would be able to uniquely identify boat. In some cases you definitely wouldn't be able, whether it's automated processing or a human looking at it. And in terms of patterns, it's even more interesting, because I mean, in some cases you want to discard it if it's just one boat sort of going around in the frame, and in some cases, if it's just the boat going away and then coming back, you still want to capture this information.
And sorry, yeah, there's another question in Q&A. Yeah, maybe I'll just read it out, Yuri, if you want to respond. I think Tayler might be typing a response. But what's the maximum distance from shore the cameras are able to capture?
That was one thing that we looked at, was looking for areas that had a maximum distance of 2 kilometers. So there was at least one area where we had 2 cameras set up looking in the same direction, because it was slightly more than 2 kilometers. And so we wanted to decrease that distance and opportunity to capture boats in the photographs. So in Naden Narrows, we had 2 cameras facing each other, essentially, to make sure that we captured boat traffic there.
There's another question, actually from Megan, but say, what did you learn about the types and patterns of small vessels behavior that you didn't know before this pilot study?
I think it confirmed quite a bit of what we had known already, in terms of there being high traffic on the north coast of Haida, knowing that there's fishing lodges out there. I think the amount of activity being so dispersed around was a learning experience for me. but it definitely I think it's confirmed that what we know about the area is pretty consistent, and it's just making sure the big part of this work is learning how we can proportionally represent boats without AIS, because there's other tools that are out there that other areas of the coast have been utilizing, like NASP aerial sites, to identify small vessel traffic without AIS and understand the proportion that's out there in certain areas. But Haida Gwaii is largely uncovered. It's only opportunistic flights that go out there. So it's just learning about different potential tools that could help us understand what that proportion is, so that we could feed it into other work as a potential for just existing data gaps, if that answers your question.
I think so. I actually have a question about, so before I was associated with University of Victoria, we had a project where we were using cameras. But one of the things we added to it was trying to estimate the location of the vessels in the cameras by georeferencing the image. So is that effort being considered here as well?
That was part of the original scope of the work, was to find areas that we could create a line basically and say, okay, this shoreline is this distance, or the waterway is this distance in between shorelines, and this is what we know. But there wasn't enough unique features, and we didn't have the capacity to do that work for the time. So the scope was reduced to just focus on if the cameras were a viable option for us to do the work. Though we have met with Ben, who worked with you in that, to discuss other potential opportunities to enhance the work. We had a meeting between Yuri and myself and Ben and another one of the project partners to discuss how we can work more closely together in terms of the work that you both did.
Okay, so my and maybe you said this already, but moving forward, the plan is to continue, like the cameras are still ongoing, or are they being removed, or like what's the next, like the plan moving forward with this?
We don't currently have cameras out right now. We want to use as much as this data set as possible due to some reductions in capacity in this project. We're focusing on the 2021 data set that we have, to seeing what we can learn and then identify where we want to place cameras to get a bit more of an understanding in those specific environments. Yuri, do you have anything to add there?
Not specifically, no. I mean, it would be good to, with the stuff that we've learned, we can certainly, well, there are two sides to it. With the stuff that we've learned, it will definitely be able to, if we were to collect more camera data in the future, we'd definitely be able to enhance and do better than what we did in multiple areas. First of all, with the sort of more insight into the camera placing. Secondly, in terms of the more sort of the geolocation of the images, we do need to sort of get some, basically in order to do that, we ideally want to take, with each camera, take a photo of sort of known positions, put a buoy or sort of drive a boat and photograph the boat and sort of with the measured distances, and then we can derive and locate the object in that photo later on. Sort of that's with the new data collection, and that's happening at some point. But the second is because we already have the photos, and for example, the machine learning methods keep progressing, right? We can always retrain a new and better network, the one that's better able to distinguish the boats, perhaps detect some that we were not able to detect before, perhaps detect that's the part of the ongoing thing, to be able to classify the boats. Right now, the current one is essentially boat, no boat, so it just detects the boat, not the classes. But the idea is that we should be able to at least classify the boats broadly, in terms of fishing vessel and tug, motor boat, that sort of thing. and just rerun it on the existing data set and obtain new data from it.
Awesome. Okay. Yeah, I think that answers your questions. I believe, Megan, as well, about how we can improve those machine learning approaches for future camera use. So I think the retraining the models so they can be better identifying and then even classifying the vessel types. I see that as you can iterate, like keep improving the more time you have and more photos potentially you'll have as well. There is a question in the chat. Actually, there's two questions. I'll read the first one. How will the data be used to decrease the noise pollution in the area? By creating new policies, innovation, traffic control? That's a question by Gurpreet Singh.
Hi. One of the projects that's being worked on under the Reconciliation Framework Agreement is the cumulative effects of marine shipping, which I see both Paula and Sam are in the participants. But one of the projects under that initiative is understanding noise through AIS data. And that is one gap in the study for the Haida Gwaii subregion, is we don't have a way of adding non-AIS vessels into that data set because we don't have NASP aerial surveys coming into the area regularly. So this project aimed to pilot a potential way of feeding data into work such as that is aiming to address those questions and create management measures and policies.
Excellent. Hope that answers your question, Gurpreet. And there is another question by Mokinhe, if I say that right. Is there a plan to use hydrophones to detect vessels in addition to using cameras?
In Gwaii, there's hydrophones that are set up currently. This is an area that was a gap for this study, and that was because just logistics during the peak of COVID pandemic. Our organizations were doing our work separately because of COVID policies. And we wanted to make sure that Gwaii staff were involved in the work and could support. So at that time, Gwaii was just decided not to be included for this work, and we'd focus on other areas on Haida Gwaii. So hydrophones, a potential, but we don't have the current capacity to install them in other areas right now.
And there's one more question. Is a SBC, single board computer, powerful enough to run vessel detection algorithm currently used? If yes, then SBC goes with a camera as a detection unit, may be able to detect ships at real time.
Yes. The short answer is yes. We haven't done it for this project, but I just sort of personally and for research just played around with various devices like that. And yes, you should be able to run the network on something like Raspberry Pi, though I haven't tried that. There are, in fact, even now the OpenCV have released a little sort of 1-unit camera, which has a capacity to run the deep learning network on board of the camera. I mean, it still have to be, it's kind of a test unit. You still have to power it up and interface with it. But yeah, there are definitely not a lot of compute that you need to analyze sort of a single image, particularly if you don't need real-time answers from it. So, it might take a few seconds to process, but it's fine, generally speaking. So yes, it is a possibility. It doesn't really, unfortunately, help the real-time data in our case, because even if you have the single board computer attached to the camera and it's able to detect the vessel. So yes, the data that it needs to send us is a lot smaller, but it's not going to be sent to be able to send it to us if there is no satellite coverage where the camera is. There are ways around it, I suppose. They could use like an Iridium phone or something like that, which is where it's expensive to send a lot of data, but not that expensive to send a little bit. And things are constantly improving. So hopefully in the near future, maybe.
Awesome. All right, so I think we're gonna leave it at that. If you have more questions, maybe use the chat, and I, invite the Tayler, Kelly, and Jury to keep answering questions as they come in. But I would like to have a 5-minute break before we move into the next presentation. So it's 1:57 my time. So we'll just convene in 5 minutes. So that will be, 2 p.m. So it will be 11 Pacific time. And yeah, we'll talk to you shortly. Welcome again, everyone. For this seminar, we are going to start with the next presentation, and then again, we'll allow time for questions, and then we'll wrap up. Our next guest speaker is Sam King, a senior scientist with Protected Seas. Sam started as a GIS analyst and M2 applications developer with Protected Seas in 2018, and progressed to her current role as a senior scientist in January of this year. Her recent work has included using the marine monitoring system to track fishing activity near MPAs off the Californian coast, finding that boaters often cluster around the edges of marine protected areas, benefiting from sea life spillover by fishing the line. The results of this work suggest that MPAs are working. She has a Bachelor of Environmental Science from the University of South Florida and a Master's of Marine Sciences from San Francisco State University. And Sam currently is based in Boston. So you want to share your slides and make sure that I'll let you know if they're showing okay.
Everything was okay?
All good, yes.
Great. Thank you. Yeah. Hi, everyone. Thank you, Norma. And thank you to Clear Seas for inviting us to be part of these webinars. Everything has been fascinating so far. So we're really excited to be able to be a part of it. So I'll be speaking about the Marine Monitor, or M2 for short. So M2 is a vessel monitoring platform, both the physical system and the software. It uses a marine radar, camera, and other sensors, including AIS, to monitor nearby vessel activity on the water. And it collects data fully autonomously and continuously 24/7. It's ideal for monitoring nearshore managed areas and especially useful for monitoring remote areas. This system in the image here is currently monitoring a pretty remote part of the coast in Southern California. So before we get into more details about the system, I wanted to show some data from one of our longest continuously operating systems. And this system is in Haro Strait. It's on the border of Washington State on the US side and British Columbia on the Canadian side. Real quick, on many of my slides, I'm going to reference our partners for the site that I'm talking about. And I just want to say that none of the work that I'm going to be presenting would be possible without them. And M2 is usually within their side, just one of the projects that they're working on. So if any of these kind of case studies piques your interest, I highly recommend checking out our partners for their related sites work as well. So M2 collects data by radar, but also collects AIS information on vessels in the area. I think Kelly mentioned AIS. If anyone's not familiar, automatic identification system used for commercial vessels. But you can see here, if we just looked at AIS data from this site across these 4 years, we see about 30 vessels a day, and there's some interesting temporal patterns, maybe a dip because of the worst years of the pandemic, and then we get into maybe some seasonal variation. But when we add the data collected strictly by radar, we really see how much is missing if you were only looking at AIS. And in fact, you would miss at this site about 60% of the vessel activity, and then also some significant, potentially interesting patterns. So some details on the system: marine radar tracks all vessels from kayaks all the way to ships, and there's no participation required. It's ideal for tracking small vessels out to about 5 nautical miles, around 10 kilometers. And radar typically tracks vessels in all conditions, in fog, during the day, obviously, and at night. And it does this with high resolution, and provides vessel locations in space and their speeds as well. And M2 gets a data point about every few seconds. Now, unlike AIS, the radar system does not provide anything about the vessel's identity. So what we have added is a camera that will pan and zoom to the vessel location that's reported by the radar. And so in this way, users can see, they'll get the track lines similar to AIS data and the location on the water, but then they can use the image to see what the vessel is, and then also what it might be doing. So if it's in a no fishing area, there's obviously concern on whether or not the boat's fishing or not. And so M2 also collects data by AIS, like I've mentioned. We collect the full suite of AIS information, so vessel type, vessel name, all of these things. And our users have found it's really helpful to look for non-participating vessels, because you see the AIS and the radar data at the same time, so you can relate the two. And M2 collects data from Class A AIS, which is used on the commercial ships that are required to use it. But we also collect Class B information as well, which is typically used by the smaller vessels that might not be required to use it, but still want to use it on the water, for safety or whatnot. So, like a lot of folks that have presented in these webinars, probably all, we see the clear need to monitor vessels beyond AIS. And we chose radar to do that because it's an established and reliable technology. It's available today, and it's also very familiar to mariners and those who work on the water. And so this is an image that kind of demonstrates the things that I was just touching on. So this is showing kind of the view of the data from our site looking over Harrow Strait. And M2 system is located there on the map in the top right corner. And then you can see the red radar imagery over the map, and that identifies solid objects on the water. And so that can be islands, that can be markers, and then that can also be vessels. So with the purple track line, you can see that this is the path of this commercial vessel you can see in the image. And this target and the one just to its right are being tracked by both AIS and radar. So you can kind of see they each have dual targets. But then in the top right with the orange track, the camera captured a picture of this vessel, and it is indeed a recreational vessel that's not transmitting AIS. And so if we were not using, or if we were only looking at AIS in this instance, this vessel would just be absent from the picture. M2 is used by different groups and organizations all over, government agencies, MPA managers, enforcement, NGOs, and then also research institutions. It turns out a lot of people are interested in small vessel activity across a number of different applications. This system here is located in Mexico, and our NGO partners work with both local and federal enforcement agencies, and they get the data to the people that need it. So they share the data easily across agencies. So we have over 20 active systems out in the world right now. We've deployed over 30 in total to 12 countries since 2015. And up until now, I've only shown images of our very powerful off-grid system, the mobile marine monitor. But not every situation calls for the need, for an off-grid system. And so this is kind of the very core basics of what M2 is. And so it's really, it's simply a camera paired with the radar that then sends data to the M2 control center, which does all the computing, and then sends data to the M2 viewer, which is the outer facing interface that our users would interact with. And you can access, this is browser based, so you don't need software or anything like that to access it. And it's sending data live. So from your computer in your office or at your home, you can see what's going on live on the water from these locations, and also access the historical data as well. In the context of the last presentation, I also wanted to mention that we're working on a pilot project similar to what Yuri was talking about, using a Raspberry Pi to kind of simplify the footprint out in the field, to try to get the data collected by the camera, processed, and then to the cloud in real time. This system here is on a marine safety center in Southern California. So in this instance, it was just really convenient. They were able to just mount the radar and the camera on the roof, and then the box sits just right next to it on the roof. So it's all, prepared for the environment and things like that. So the radar system works the same way that you would use it on a boat. So if you're familiar with that, you're on your boat and you're using your radar system to be able to see the other objects on the water. But in this case, the radar is right there on the shore. And the radar still identifies vessel positions from the radar imagery. But then what M2 software does is it takes those positions and generates track lines to be able to look at activity over time. And I also want to add that our radar data, like the track right here, is really modeled after AIS data, which makes it easy if you want to view both or analyze both at the same time. So here in the M2 viewer, you can see that same track line, and then also the picture that the camera captured, which is lingering inside this protected area shown in the red boundaries. And so, for live enforcement, users can sign up to receive alerts. So if you have the need to respond in real time, you can get an alert on your phone or through email. And this MPA specifically is intended to protect an area of multi-species spawning. And so there is no fishing allowed. But tourism is very popular here. This is off the coast of Belize. And this vessel looks like it could be a dive boat. So in this case, the managers at this site would get an alert of the activity that's in the protected area. Then they could log in, look at the camera and decide whether or not they need to respond. So I want to show some examples of the photos that M2 captures. So range can really depend on the camera that's being used, and then also based on the location. But generally within 1 nautical mile, about 2 kilometers, you can identify the vessel. Sometimes with the identification numbers, just kind of depends. At 3 miles, you can identify the vessel type, and then out to about 5 nautical miles, basically just confirm presence, but know that a vessel is there. And so I also want to take a second and talk about privacy. M2 strictly observes private or public spaces, and we specifically configure the sites to only take pictures of the water. And we also work with the site managers for each individual site to really only monitor the areas that they're managing. And I should say that access to our data is strictly limited to users who have been approved. So M2 was originally designed as a tool for enforcement, and I've kind of spoke to that a little bit. But over the years, we've seen its utility in other fields as well. So for the rest of the presentation, I'm going to show M2 in action and with using some of the examples from these applications. Okay, first, I'd like to share some news that have come out of our sites in Southern California. In 2021, M2 observed a fishing charter boat like the one in this image here, and you can see it was lingering inside an MPA. And I want to note that all of the vessel images in the rest of these slides the images were captured autonomously by M2. So if you look in the circle in the map, you'll see that vessel in the top left corner, and you can see it's hanging out inside that MPA. And so state enforcement boarded the vessel and confirmed that they were fishing where they weren't supposed to. And then eventually M2 data were used in the successful prosecution of illegal fishing in this area. Now, these two heat maps in the bottom left, they came out of a paper we were actually really inspired to write based on some of the work of the other presenters. Looking at AIS and non-AIS activity is so important right now, and we now have so many tools to be able to do it. So the research confirmed what I think a lot of folks have seen is that, at least in the MPAs we looked at, using AIS data alone obscured and hid some patterns of activity. So definitely a theme. Norm also mentioned our recent publication looking at fishing activity around MPAs. And so I just wanted to briefly share some results on what we saw there. I should say that when the presentations are made available, these little links that I've provided in each slide here for these case studies will take you to the publication or the story or whatnot. So in this study specifically, we looked at 3 locations in California at kind of a gradient of distance to urban areas, but we saw similar results at all 3. There was the same or more activity in the near vicinity of the MPA compared to outside. And then when we really drilled down, we found that activity was very clustered at the boundaries. So there is a lot of good work happening in California in the MPA system there. Species monitoring has found multiple instances of positive impacts on species biomass. And here, with this research, M2 showed that fishers could also maybe be benefiting from this. Going forward, it also will be important to keep monitoring this fishing the line activity and its impact on species as well. Now, in the San Francisco Bay Area, there's growing concern, like a lot of other places as well, of the overlap with heavy vessel traffic and more whales present in these urban areas. Spaces can be extremely tight when you have these large objects moving about. So there's substantial commercial shipping in the San Francisco area, travels in known pathways, but there's also a lot of recreational traffic as well, and they're not so predictable, and they sometimes and very often travel faster than these large ships as well. Recently, there's been an unusual mortality event for gray whales off the US West Coast, including this area. And some of these mortalities have been attributed to vessel strikes. And it's possibly because the whales are spending more time in these urban areas, and maybe the boats and the whales aren't necessarily used to having to look out for each other. On the US East Coast, M2 is also used by NOAA to monitor vessel speeds in the North Atlantic right whale seasonal management zones, and those are typically around the major ports along the eastern seaboard. And this is especially relevant under the new rules being considered here in the US that would require smaller vessels, maybe not broadcasting AIS, to follow the speed limits that the large ships have to follow when there are whales present. And if this rule becomes a reality, there's not really an established method right now for looking at compliance for non-AIS vessels. So finally, the M2 site that I've mentioned before, this is on San Juan Island, Washington, looking over Harrow Straits. This site monitors critical habitat for the highly endangered southern residents. Just like San Francisco Bay, lots of vessel traffic of all types and sizes. And in 2022, M2 actually observed the sinking of a fishing vessel, the Aleutian Isle. And then the system also monitored the very long, months-long cleanup of diesel fuel and debris in the habitat. And during this time, M2 was able to identify vessels that entered the no-go safety zone that was established around the wreck site as the cleanup was going on. So thankfully, there are a lot of people working on the issue of vessel monitoring beyond AIS and the management that comes along with it. Clearly, this webinar series is a great example of all of the work going on. But I think it's also pretty clear that there's not one solution that is going to meet all of the needs for everyone trying to monitor, different things in different areas. But the benefits that M2 brings are 24/7 high-resolution data collection, integration of small vessel information, and in this instance, the camera is especially valuable. It's also been in use in the field since 2015. It uses reliable, familiar technology. It can monitor remote areas. And also, as other technologies are progressing, we can also, and have worked with those to try to integrate and to really bring both up and make both more powerful. And then, ultimately, M2 is, because of this, really a platform for collaboration and partnerships. So I want to take a second and acknowledge the rest of the M2 team. I've shown just a small part of the work the group's done over the last 8 years with only a few of our many partners. So, please, if anything is of interest to you, please check out the team's work at our website. And thank you again.
Excellent. Thank you for that presentation, Tam. All right, so I'm opening the floor for any questions. I'll read the first question that comes from Megan. So how often do you need to check on the M2 system in remote areas?
I will say, ideally never. It's designed to operate 100% autonomously, and there have been sites. There was one here in the US on an island, the Channel Islands, that operated not intentionally by itself for a year and a half during the pandemic, but was not visited at all and required no attention during that time. So really, there's not any need to visit the physical system. We do have kind of a process of checking in on the systems virtually. Most of our systems are, online, so they're transmitting data live, and so we can log in and access them. And we have a number of checks set up, involve notifications on our end and for our partners. So if it goes offline unexpectedly, or if it's something is not working as expected, we'll get notified to it remotely so that we can go in and check on it. And I will say, probably 95% of any issues that come up are able to be resolved remotely. And when this does happen, if something needs to be addressed, we have a network of people that will then go out in the field to address it if there is something that needs to be attended to.
We have a question in the Q&A from Lace Chavez. What is the average annual cost for the unit?
So the costs can vary a lot based on what you need. I showed kind of both ends of the spectrum, the very basic, what we call the M2 system that can be, deployed when there's power and when there's access to internet, all the way up to the M3, the mobile marine monitor off-grid system. And so very generally, the M2 very basic system can run about $100,000 US dollars, and then up to the mobile system can be around $200,000 US dollars. And like I said, it also kind of depends on, you know, what you might have access to if you want to do any upgrades or things like that. Like I mentioned, the camera, we have the ability to integrate more high-powered cameras with better definition, or different radars, even maybe with a greater range or something like that. So it really kind of varies, but that's at least, you know, kind of a ballpark.
Good. I have another question from Megan. So you mentioned the distance from shore that the M2 can cover, but what is the extent of shoreline that can be observed by the system?
So, you know, I should mention one of the basics of radar is that it sends out a pulse that needs to bounce off of objects and then be returned to the antenna. And so how much coastline it can observe kind of depends on the topography and the geography of how the coastline is laid out. You know, in a perfect maybe situation where everything is at sea level, you know, and the coastline maybe runs straight up north to south, you know, we'll get that full entire 180-degree view. But just like the, I guess the camera then and the radar are both going to be, you know, they're going to be restricted by if there's a big, you know, a hill or something like that, or even maybe a building that's blocking the view of a different, you know, inlet or something like that. We are a little bit limited by that. But when we do work with our partners to pick the site, those are all things that we talk about, and we can try to estimate ahead of time to really maximize that specific location.
Thank you. So Kelly has a question for you too. So you mentioned about M2 being used to support law enforcement work. Were you asked to explain how the technology works and its accuracy? And if so, what was your reply?
Sorry, I'm reading the question again. Yeah, so law enforcement does use our data, both to inform when to go out, and then also in, you know, criminal proceedings or things like that. I mean, not criminal, but legal proceedings. So yes, we do, you know, we kind of have a legal package that we provide that explains the technology, estimates error, and kind of explains how we would do those analysis. We use mostly commercially available equipment. So the radars and the cameras that are out there, they're all, we take them from the manufacturer and integrate them into our system. So they have public documents on specifications, accuracy, and things like that. So it's all kind of backed up in their content, and that's been really helpful for building confidence in the data that we're seeing for enforcement when they have to maybe answer questions, you know, related to these things.
I don't see any questions, but we had a meeting before this seminar, so there were some good questions then before, and I want to bring them to this forum just for the benefit of people participating to this call, and it's about you know, monitoring for spits, and if that's something that you can do. You show examples about, you know, the presence or absence of a vessel within a protected area, but if the measure is a management measure related to speed restrictions, is that something that your system can integrate or address?
Yeah, and absolutely. The radars that we use, like as I mentioned, they're commercial, and so they're used for safety on boats. That's their intent, and so they are required to operate at certain accuracies. And one of the most important functions of a radar on board a boat is to look for, be on the lookout for approaching vessels, because obviously that, you know, running into another vessel is probably the worst thing that can happen out on the water. And so they have to be very accurate on speed so that they can predict, you know, time to when a collision would occur, to be able to alert the boat operator to a, you know, incoming target. So the speed estimates are highly accurate, and it is speed over ground. the way that the radar system calculates speed is a little complex. And using radar to estimate speed is, for boats, I should say, is something that a lot of people are working on, and there's not a clean answer right now. We've estimated with our system, it's about within 1 knot accuracy. The system that is used by NOAA here in the US on the East Coast, they're using the system for the same thing. So they're evaluating how well it can identify the speed of vessels, because we have speed limit rules here at certain times of the year. There is a legal grounding, or a legal basis, I should say, in using radar for speed. Most of us are probably aware of it, traffic radar and issuing speeding tickets. So it's it's kind of the same technology at its core. And so as we're looking at vessel speeds for these smaller vessels, AIS kind of has been the standard for looking at speed, but now we're starting to kind of have to figure out what that looks like in an accuracy standpoint, and how to best report that for management areas. And that's something that we're working on too.
Don't see any questions on the Q&A or the chat. Because I'll just have one more question, and it's related to, and maybe you explained this before, but now I'm not 100% clear how it works. The radar, you get a signal, so you can track it then, but you don't really know what the vessel, like if it's the vessel type, or but you can use a camera to do that. But it's used when you're using sort of counts from or the data from the radar. Is there a way to tell that it's a unique vessel that you're counting, or is it counting transects, but it could be from the same vessel going back and forth, or is it linking the camera somehow to it? Because then it could be another step within the camera, like within the image, to say, okay, this is a unique vessel and it's attached to this radar signal, so now this is a unique ID or something like that.
Yeah, and I was so fascinated listening to the first presentation, because I think we're all kind of working on the same things. And so that is something that we've talked about. We are also working on some pilot projects using automatic identification of vessels and images, using machine learning. So for your question specifically on the radar, if it leaves the range, if a unique vessel comes through, leaves the range, turns around, comes back in, if it's outside the range by a certain amount of time, we will kind of drop it, and when it comes back in, it will have a different unique ID paired with it. So right now we haven't tied the camera to the radar information to do what you said, so to be able to say, like, yes, this is the same track, or sorry, the same boat. But that's something that we could try and do in the future. I think Yuri mentioned, identifying the specific unique boat in an image autonomously is pretty challenging. And so I hope it's possible one day. But we're also working on vessel classification and trying to enrich our data set by adding that as well, because we're getting so many pictures. I think that could really add a lot to the data, because the track lines on the map are definitely interesting for seeing what the vessel is doing, but knowing what's in that photo and being able to count the photo and say what it is in a quick autonomous way will be really powerful.
Thank you. So I think I don't see any other questions in the Q&A on the chat. Megan has a suggestion, and is to kind of wrap up this section of Sam's presentation on M2 and go back to Kelly from EMSA, and to talk a little bit more about their project with the Port of Windsor and the use of radar, and how that information is being used. So if Kelly is okay with that, thank you, Sam, for your presentation, and then we'll spend just a few minutes on this. If Kelly's okay with it.
Sure. Yeah. Thanks very much, Norma. And yeah, Megan, thanks for the question. The Port of Windsor joined with our Indigenous partners in sponsoring, collaborating with us on a specific project, and it was partly sponsored by Transport Canada, so that the port could develop an API, an interface between their existing radar system and port management system and EMSA. And so what that allowed was for us to bring in their India band, their navigation radar for the Port of Windsor, and bring in the real-time data that is compiled. And obviously it's a digital system, so you're not trying to move analog images from one to another. It's digital information which is being transferred through this API, which is an intended interface with a geographic information system. The data, once it's ingested in EMSA, you've got that real-time shipping picture, and of course anything that's being detected by the radar, which can include non-participants in the port. That information is also available. It provides a track, and then if you've got other information, you can potentially correlate that radar track with that other information. So, for example, if there's a Port Authority vessel on the water, that individual using the EMSA app can take a picture of the vessel if they're in radio communications with the harbor master, take a picture of that vessel, and in real time upload it to EMSA. That image, if it's geographically referenced, will appear in EMSA and can be correlated with the radar track. And if you wanted to take a screen capture, you could capture all that information in one snapshot. That's one example. If the port, from a marine safety and security point of view, if the port wanted to have an expanded database of the underwater information, the marine science considerations, environmental, marine protected areas, there's literally, I think there's over 3,000 data layers, publicly available data layers in EMSA, which can be brought in to create the picture, your common operating picture that you want to be working with. And then any of that data can be correlated with the radar picture, which you've now superimposed on top of that data. And you can prioritize the data in how you see it. So there's so many potential applications for that kind of capability. It's really it's hard to pin it down to one thing. And somebody looking at it through a marine security lens would have a different perspective than somebody who's looking at it through a marine safety lens. Yeah, so there's a tremendous amount of flexibility there. Megan, do you have any other questions regarding that, or does anyone want to probe this a little further?
No, that's really great, and maybe that's something that will come up in future sessions. And I really appreciate that, Kelly. It's interesting to think about the potentials that we can with all these different technologies working together.
Well, we haven't even touched on the use of drones, and our partners are using drones to do shoreline mapping and incorporate that information into EMSA, and do so in a way that they can monitor for changes over time. We have shoreline data, which is the aerial photography of the coastline all along the coast, and you can literally see an image just about anywhere on the coast at different times of the video. and that is also geographically referenced. So yeah, lots of possible opportunities here, and you know, you can if you can think of any kind of a sensor, you know, be it visual or acoustic underwater, you know, even a line of sight. If you've got two lines of sight, you can get the position of a vessel on the water. If you've got two cameras that are looking to seaward, you can triangulate the position and then you know, establish a position, course, and speed of that vessel. You know, the technology is all there for going beyond just AIS.
Thank you, Lily. I'm just conscious of time, and I also need to wrap up because I need to catch a plane. But there is a question by Paul Blomers about if you have any screenshots of the Port of Winston project radar API deployment to follow up. Maybe I'll suggest if you can.
We can connect after.
Yeah, I will say so.
And then maybe we
I've
can make
done-
that part of the material that we share with people.
Yeah, we can do that. So I think if we're just gonna wrap it then. I will say thank you everyone for presenting today. Fantastic presentations. Too bad we didn't have Rianna from DFO presenting today, but again, we'll try to see if we can schedule that talk at another of the seminar times that we have. I believe we have 2 left, Megan? I think it's 3 more, right?
Yes, yeah, 3 more to go.
Yeah, so we'll have another one in another 2 weeks and so on. So again, just check the website for more information about the upcoming ones. And also you will receive an email when the recordings and slides are made available on the website. And is there anything else I need to say? Yeah, on the next session will be about featuring applications on water-based technologies such as autonomous vessels and buoys. So very, very interesting seminar in a couple of weeks. And it will be on, thank you, Megan, on Thursday, November 9th at 10 a.m. Pacific time. And I think with that, we can conclude the session. So again, thank you very much for attending, and have a good rest of your day. Bye.